Hey, this is Dan Golodner from Tales from the Ruther Library. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Hello, working people of Southwest Washington.
You're listening to episode 46 of Working to Live in Southwest Washington, produced by the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council. Like the bumper you heard at the top of the show says, we're also a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 radio shows and podcasts for working people just like you. Find out more about the network at laborradionetwork.org. I'm Harold Phillips, and before we get started, we want to remind you that the views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council, its affiliate unions, our guests' unions or employers, not even all those political signs you see at every freaking intersection these days. Nobody's but theirs. Now that we've got that over with, by the time you listen to this, working people, you'll probably have received your ballot for the 2024 general election in the mail. Now, you probably know who you're going to vote for president and governor, but there are a lot of other offices on this year's ballot, and you might be a little unclear on what those offices do or who's running for them. For instance, state senator, or for that matter, state representative. Now, these aren't your senator and representative in the other Washington. That's your senator and representatives here in this Washington, in our state legislature in Olympia. So what's the difference between them? To help us out with that, we've got 3 people running for our state legislature in the 18th Legislative District. Deacon Letnich, running for state representative. Thanks for joining us, Deacon.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
John Zingali, also running for representative. Great to see you again, John.
Pleasure as always. Thank you.
And Adrian Cortez, running for the state Senate. Thank you so much for being here, Adrian.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
So, John, Deacon, you're both running for state representative. Are you running against each other?
That's a great question. I'll put on my history teacher hat for a moment. We actually are not. For those that are unaware, we have 49 legislative districts in the state of Washington. And just like the federal government, we have more representatives than we do senators. So each legislative district gets 2 representatives and 1 senator. And so Deacon and I are not running against one another. He's running for position number 1, and I'm running for position number 2. And we're elected to 2-year terms, just like the federal government, but then the state Senate is elected to 4-year terms. So just like at the federal level, the Senate serves for a longer term and there's less of them than the House of Representatives.
So, Adrian, what's the difference between the state Senate and the federal Senate? I mean, obviously the state Senate is in Olympia, the federal Senate is in Washington, D.C., but what's the difference here?
I think John described it pretty accurately. Obviously, there's 2 different chambers. You have the Senate chamber as well as the House chamber, and they both work on particular priorities. But at the end of the day, they do have to get together and they do have to come to some form of consensus if they are to pass any bills and forward those on to the governor for the governor to sign.
But Deacon, I guess what I'm getting at here is there's a lot of people out there who don't even know they have a state Senate or a state House of Representatives, right? What's the difference between state government and federal government?
I mean, there's any number of differences, but I think the easiest way is to just narrow it down to your neighborhood, your local community, your state, right? Federal is, addressing issues of the nation. And locally here, we're looking more at like specific projects, the bridge at I-5, Evergreen School District, things that matter locally and that are more relative to the 18th, which is an area that goes from Battleground down to Orchards and over to Philida. we're focused primarily on that and the issues of the state, where the federal government is worried more about the national issues. So it's a chance for us to be more local and dial things in a little closer to home.
As a former mayor and a three-time city council member in the city of Battleground, obviously we care about issues that affect that particular municipality. We do go up to Olympia and lobby and petition our state legislators. That includes our state representatives and our state senators for help when it comes to projects that we may have in our city. And the state legislature is supposed to be very responsive in helping the communities across the state. And so that kind of shows you the symbiotic working relationship that, a local government would have with its state representatives and its state senate.
Yeah. And on that note, this is all because of the 10th Amendment to the federal Constitution, which says that any powers not given to the federal government are released to the states. And so this is where rights that aren't explicitly in the Constitution or in the amendments can then fall back to the states. And it allows us in Washington to give people cleaner air and help fund our schools and things like that. And so that's what we're working to do in Olympia.
And I think the same thing goes all the way up to the federal government, right? One of you mentioned the bridge that is currently in the final stages of starting construction. That's a situation where the state legislature would go up to the federal legislature in order to work that out. So really, it seems like there's a lot of work happening from all sorts of different levels.
With a project like that, too, the Oregon legislature is working with the Washington legislature. So you have multiple state legislatures working together, too, because of the impact to that. So that's actually not just the Washington legislature. And then you've got all the city and local municipalities working in. So that's one of those major projects that's going to touch every facet of government for sure.
Well, since we're talking about working together, John, Deacon, you're running for the House of Representatives. Adrian, you're running for the Senate. Now, you're in two different chambers, but you still have to work together, right? How does that work?
How does that work? Well, for example, if I were to prime sponsor a bill and it was passed through the House, it would then be sent over to the Senate for them to approve it as well, and then get sent back to the House to continue on the process.
So bills can start in the House and move up to the Senate, but Adrian, they can also start in the Senate. Do they move down to the House?
Like I said earlier, it's a symbiotic relationship between both chambers. And so, we may have bills that start in the Senate, but they don't get the same traction in the House. And so they go nowhere, and vice versa. That's why it is important that both chambers work with each other.
Yeah, and I'm lucky enough to be running with a fellow teacher in the Senate here. And so if we're working on education bills, one of the things that I always want to do is, like, Adrian and I will be talking pretty much all the time, because we want our bills to match as much as possible. So that way we're not going back and forth all this time. So any negotiation that we can do prior to the vote and get those bills as close as possible, the less that we have to go back and forth to amend and things like that. So I really want to make sure that we're working not just with Deacon in the House to get what we need, and make sure like labor and all those other things are included in those pieces that we're negotiating, but we want to work with the Senate as well, so that way we can streamline the process and not have as many votes go back and forth before something gets fully passed.
John, I'm glad that you mentioned that you're a teacher. As a teacher, you're all about teaching lessons, but I think you've run for this position before, right? What are some of the lessons that you've learned from your first run that have really shaped how you've run this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you're correct. I did run 2 years ago. We came oh so close. I was up on election night. We were feeling good. And unfortunately, it swung the other way as some other votes came in. But one of the things that I know I've learned is, if you walked into my classroom, you see a big sign that says fail up on the door. And it's because it's your first attempt in learning. I think we really learn more from a lot of our failures, or I would say non-successes, than we do on anything else. And so I was a little naive and, wet behind the ears, I guess, the first time. And this next time we made sure we were much more prepared and ready right off the bat. I've grown a lot as a public speaker and reaching out to doing different candidate things. My ultimate goal in all of this too is to help develop our younger generation. I want them to see that, you know what, sometimes things don't go well the first time you try something, and that you can't give up if you really truly believe in it. You can't give up on things. So
The listeners can't see this, but the other teacher in the room here, Adrian, is nodding through this entire thing.
I have to really commend John, and your listeners really need to understand that in today's day and age of politics, we are seriously and significantly lacking leaders like John that are willing to say that, hey, I learned a lot. I failed at this, but here's what I learned, and here's how it made me a better person. Because I wholeheartedly subscribe to that in my classroom as I deal with my students and in my own personal life, right? You know, failures, learning from failures, it makes you a better person and it makes you a better leader.
Now, Adrian, you are a teacher, just like John. What motivated you to run for the state Senate?
You know, I've served for 3 terms as a city council member in the city of Battleground, for 1 term as the mayor. I've served on various other organizations, like I've also chaired the C-Tran Board of Directors, which is a regional transit agency here in Clark County. And I've been able to be very blessed with seeing how the decisions that I've been a part of come to reality and being able to work with others, being able to collaborate with others, and seeing that actually come to fruition on many of those projects or many of those initiatives. I've always subscribed to the fact that what can I do to make my community a better place? And so when the opportunity presented itself on running at a state level, in this case, the state Senate, I thought to myself, you know, it really does align with my goal on being able to make a greater impact to a greater number of individuals. And so that's why ultimately I decided to run for the state Senate.
What about you, Deacon? What brought you to run for the House of Representatives?
Yeah, I've been pretty fortunate to be an advocate for the laborers union up in Olympia for the last handful of years. And the last 2 years specifically, we were able to pass some of our priority legislation. 2 years ago, it was 5272. That was our speed zone cameras at the start of construction zones. And that was really born out of need. Our members kept getting killed on the job. One of the best deterrents for reckless driver behavior is a state trooper at the start of a work zone. But because of the massive trooper shortages in the state, we're now allowed to have a photo radar enforcement at the start of the work zone when state troopers are not available. And we started in a bipartisan way from day one with Senator King, the co-chair of transportation, and worked both sides of the aisle to get it done in a single legislative session and passed nearly unanimously. And then last year, it was 2266, which was our safe and sanitary protection. So it afforded women returning to work that had the need a clean, lockable space to pump and store breast milk, and then basic feminine hygiene products in first aid kits. And again, started off reaching across the aisle to make sure that we were writing a good piece of legislation and got it passed in a single session nearly unanimously. Just seeing that, I felt like that was the kind of work that I could continue to do, but instead of from an advocate role, hopefully as a legislator. So that's what finally got me to throw my hat in the ring and get involved running here on the 18th.
So wait, let me see if I understand this, Deacon. You started out by just going and talking to the legislature. And overdoing that a couple of times, you realized this was something you could actually do? That seems like a big jump, yeah?
You know, not as big as it might be made out to be. It was a bigger jump to go from an apprentice to a journeyman to a organizer to an advocate, right? I never had any intention of being involved politically. I wanted to, build big things and do good things in the infrastructure world. And I was able to turn that into a job where I started advocating for workers and workers' rights. And so through that work, spending more time in Olympia, advocating for working families across the state, I just saw that it's a pretty simple process. Ultimately, it's about just open communication, negotiating, and trying to do the right thing for the right reason.
I think this is a really important point. A lot of people feel like government does things to them, right? But what you're talking about, Deacon, is you're talking about the people who live and work under the laws that the legislature sets, actually going and talking to the legislature and making change, making new laws or changing laws. That's kind of a powerful thing, yeah, but a lot of people, they don't feel like they can do that. They feel like they have to be someone special to go talk to somebody in a place like that.
No, definitely not. What is it, John? Of the people, for the people, by the people? I mean, every single American, every single person in the 18th legislative district has the right to head up to Olympia and advocate for a cause that's important to them. I was lucky enough to do that in a professional role for the members that I represent in the laborers, but I would encourage anybody that hears this, if they have something they're passionate about, to head up to Olympia, or you may even have the opportunity over Zoom now to speak to their elected officials and let them know what they think they need or what they feel will help improve their lives the most, because it's an old saying, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So if we don't know as legislators what is most important to people in our area, how can we fix it? I know that I would welcome hearing from any member of the 18th or any person in Washington, frankly, and I'm willing to bet that John and Adrian would echo that statement.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is actually when I ran 2 years ago. My substitute was doing some teaching and looking at different maps every single day. And one of the maps she showed the students was the age for marriage in each state. And a lot of the young girls and young women were like, why is Washington gray? Like, there's no minimum age. Like, what? And so they started asking questions, and little did they know, and little did we know, that there was no minimum age to get married in Washington. And these young women were furious. And so they reached out to Representative Stonier, and two of my students went and spoke to the legislature. And then just this last year, bill passed both houses, and Governor Inslee signed it into law, and we banned child marriage in the state of Washington.
And that was all just from 2 students in middle school going and talking to their legislator.
Yep, 100%. A couple people can really make a difference. I got to be with Representative Stonier when she handed over the pen to one of the students that Governor Inslee used to sign that. And I know that young lady is going to treasure that for her entire life, and she should, because she just made a massive difference for people across our state.
Adrian, John, Deacon, this show talks to the working people of Southwest Washington and the world who listen in. I mean, we do have listeners from all over, but specifically in our region. What are you hearing from those working people? What are the big issues that they're telling you want to take on when you get to Olympia?
The thing that I hear the most is childcare. On almost every single door that I have the opportunity to talk to somebody, childcare comes up. It's not available, it's not affordable. And coming from a construction background like myself, if we are pouring concrete, we'll often start 5, 6 in the morning. There is not a childcare facility one that is available at 4:30 a.m. for drop off, I promise you. And then we also constantly heard from people on doors how often they would have to turn down overtime opportunities because if they weren't there to pick their kid up on time, they would be fined or they would be removed from the program. So this is a huge obstacle as far as worker retention, new worker recruitment. When we look at families that would probably thrive having dual incomes into their home, they're often choosing to forego that because the cost of childcare is so high. It makes more sense to have one of the parents stay home and take care of the kids, which is a great thing, right? I think a lot of people would prefer to have a parent at home if they could afford to live comfortably. And not everybody has the benefit of a union job yet. So we just continue to look at solutions for childcare. I'll be anxious to get started on that day one. We've had some talks previously when I was doing work as an advocate about how we can best address that, whether it's trying out some on-site childcare facilities, whether it's grants, so a trusted family member is able to assist and maybe get a little help.
In terms of childcare being a very top priority for many families. What makes it a priority is the fact that in this day and age, because of inflation and the increase of cost of housing, among many other things, it does require more and more families to have dual incomes to be able to afford things, right? You know, I think that highlights the issue in terms of how do we make childcare more accessible and more affordable? And then how do we make childcare an industry that people want to go into because they can make a living wage providing the childcare? So,
Yeah. I know another massive issue for us in Southwest Washington, we need to address housing costs and housing prices, but Southwest Washington in particular, our education funding crisis right now. My district this last year, we began terminating about around 115 teachers. A neighboring district was about 80, and it's just hurting our community. Education is the paramount duty of our state. It's actually the only state where education is actually listed in the state constitution. And we are failing our communities by not properly fully funding that. And we need lower classroom sizes. We need more teachers, not less. We need more paraeducators to help out within the classrooms. We need funding for buses. We need funding for classroom supplies. It's just hurting our entire state. We need to really address that. We need to look at what the definition of education is, because I think it needs to include pre-K and after school care. A lot of my families say, like, look, I just want my kid to be able to stay at school for another hour, right? And so that they can do some homework and everything, because getting buses to find that daycare that's going to take care of those kids after school is not really feasible. But we can also build community within our schools and build these other things that allow kids to feel safe and comfortable in school and want to go because they're staying after and doing these different clubs or, things like that. And we also need to look at the bond percentage for building schools in the state. In Battleground and Ridgefield, they keep failing school bonds because it requires a 60% supermajority. Ridgefield, I think, failed one at over 59% and almost 59% the last couple of years. We can't have a minority of people dictating what a majority of people want. Any other bond within the state just requires a simple majority. And I would advocate for that, but I will also compromise and work across the aisle to lower that to 55, because that's the first step to allowing communities like Ridgefield and Battleground in our districts to get the new facilities that not only the kids deserve, but the community deserves. Lots of people are moving here because we have good, decent schools and it's a great place to live. We need to make sure that we have the best buildings available and the best teachers available for our students.
So it strikes me we're coming back to one major theme in this show, and it really is about the kids. It's about the child care. It's about the schools. It's about setting a good example for the younger generation who's going to come up and be in the legislature in the next 20, 30 years.
just think of what Deacon said about childcare, what John just said. If we lived in a world where we could provide pre-K, if we lived in a world where we could provide after school care, where kids could work on, homework. So when they actually go home to mom and dad after a long day's work, and before they go to soccer practice or baseball practice or whatever it may be, their homework is done. Think of a world that we would live in if we had affordable and accessible childcare. The economic impact that would be unleashed in all of our communities would far outweigh any additional costs that this would take on to tackle many of these initiatives. And I think, unfortunately, in this day and age, you have, especially from those pundits and far right politicians, they focus on simply the cost rather than the benefit.
Yeah, they're not thinking about the return on our investment. One day these future generations that are in school are going to be taking care of us. They're the ones that are going to continue this great experiment that's been lasting for about 250 years. And so we need to make sure that our investments are there. We know that these investments pay off great dividends in the future. And we need to make sure that everyone is taken care of. these are good jobs too. We want more people to become teachers. We want more people to get into the trades. Washington is what, Deacon, if I'm not mistaken, like third highest union in the nation. We're doing good work here. That's why, once again, people want to live here because we've got good weather, we've got good jobs. Let's keep growing this and embracing the change, because the future's coming whether we are ready or not. But I think we need to be ready. And that's where electing the three of us will help move our state forward, and we can be a leader for the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's a lot about working for working families. And it's easy for me to say that because it's been kind of my mantra for my campaign, at least all along. And I know that we're really lucky here in the 18th to have 3 union members running for office, right? 3 good, strong Democrats, 3 men that care about the next generation, that care about the environment, but also want to make sure that like our roads are funded and that our schools are funded. I think all of us have a real priority for the basic civil infrastructure that the 18th and that the state of Washington need. It's about getting the most bang for your buck, and it's about helping the people that you represent with the things that the most people need. And I think we're all reliant on infrastructure. We're all reliant on public schools, right? We're all reliant on our nurses, our teachers, our first responders. And so just taking care of the foundation that everybody depends on, regardless of what name they check on the ballot. You're talking to 3 gentlemen that I think will really prioritize that and really do a good job for working families in Southwest Washington when they have the chance to represent you in Olympia.
So, Deacon, if someone wants to find out more about your campaign, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Absolutely. You can shoot me an email at info@electdeacon.com, and Deacon is spelled DEKEN, or check out the campaign website, www.electdeacon.com.
And John, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
You can reach out to me at electjohnzingale@gmail.com. Zingale is Zingale. You can visit our website, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, message us through all the things. You can even call me at 360-553-9712. That'll ring straight to my cell phone. And as long as I'm, not too busy, it'll be picked up and your call will be returned. Because as we've stated, we want to hear from you. And I know the voters pamphlet is out. I've already gotten a couple of phone calls from people. They're calling. And that's the way this whole system works, is communication.
And Adrian, how would people find out more about you?
Absolutely. People can find out a little bit more about me, kind of what makes me tick, my values, my priorities at votecortez.com. Again, that's votecortez.com, and that's Cortez with an S, not a Z. And you can also email me through that website. Either myself or my campaign manager will quickly respond, and I welcome all comments as long as they're respectful and kind.
Well, thank you so much, Adrian Cortez, John Zingale, Deacon Letnich, running for the state legislature in the 18th District.
Thanks for having us today.
And thank you, working people, for joining us on another episode of Working to Live in Southwest Washington, produced by the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council. And, folks, we've talked a lot about how expensive things like childcare and affordable housing are. And Deacon pointed out that not everybody has a union job that allows them the financial security to be able to take care of those things and perhaps have somebody at home to take care of the kids. The Southwest Washington Central Labor Council believes that everybody deserves that kind of financial security. That's why they support good, solid union contracts for everybody working in our region, whether they're a teacher or a laborer, or hey, even a podcast host. That's why this podcast was recorded under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. Remember, working people, this is your show. We want to know what you want to hear on it. Email us at podcast@swwaclc.org, or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Yes, I said Twitter, at SWWACLC. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, give us 5 stars or move the bill from one chamber to the other, or whatever your podcast platform of choice gives you to let people know you like what we're doing here. One last thing, folks. I'm really glad that we got into that conversation about Deacon going and advocating before the state legislature, and about John's students advocating before their legislator. Because I think it's an important reminder. This is the way our government is supposed to work. You've probably got a ballot in your house right now. And you're probably, I hope, going to mark the oval next to the people who are supposed to represent you. Your job's not done after you drop that ballot in the mail or in the drop box. Your job has just begun. Because if there's something that you are very passionate about, if there's something that you think needs to be fixed, needs to be improved, don't assume that the people you voted for know about that. Don't assume they know all the details. They need to hear from you. That's the way our government works. Voting is only the first part of the job. If you have a cause that's important to you, after Election Day, when you know who's going to be representing you, pick up that phone, write that email. Let the people who represent you know, and then keep the conversation going. Heck, if 2 students from middle school can do it, I know you probably can. We'll see you soon.